Okay, thank you very much for giving the virtual floor to me, Superintendent Lu. Um, okay, just let me share my screen first. Okay, I hope everybody can see the screen, so I can begin. Okay, thank you very much to Siasat firstly for inviting me to give this brief talk. I think I'll try to take maybe about 20 minutes or so in the interest of time and discussion. So the topic of my speech for today is on PCVE as part of nation building. I think essentially what I'm trying to go for in this talk is for the institutionalization of PCVE into our formal and non-formal nation building efforts, primarily through the field of education. Just by way of an introduction or a background, these are a few of the recent developments with regards to governance as far as I think PCVE is concerned in Malaysia over the past 2 weeks or so. So, for example, the past 2 weeks, we had the Ministry of Unity, the minister speaking in Parliament about the introduction of Rukun Negara into the education system, for the Rukun Negara Secretariat to work with the Ministry of Education, for example. And she did mention the need to curate content to counter extremism and radicalism. So this is something that last week we also had, I think, a UNODC meeting with various agencies and stakeholders in PCVE in Malaysia, including those from the Ministry of Home Affairs, from Foreign Affairs, from PDRM Prisons, and also from Siasat. So of course, the purpose of the meeting was to look into the development of the National Action Plan, which is ongoing. CSOs were also invited, but as to what I was told, it was represented by academia in this case. And of course, CSOs are often seen to should play a prominent role in PCBA engagement, education and advocacy. I think this is an area that Malaysia is lacking somewhat. So I'll get back to CSO and their role in PCBE later. So these are the recent developments. What can we take away from these two recent developments over the past weeks? What we can say is that in Malaysia, despite the relative political instability, you can say, we did have a change of government in March. So despite this change of government, the political will for PCVE and the realization of the National Action Plan is still alive, still vibrant. Movements are still, I think, ongoing to realize, I think, this element in our strategic plan for nation building. And I would like to emphasize PCVE again to be part of nation building in these two dimensions. Yeah? The institutionalization of PCVE as part of the education curriculum. This has been mentioned before, I think, in various working groups by Hidayah and so on. So there is such a thing which is called EPVE or EPCVE. So it looks into institutionalization of PCVE elements or content into the curriculum, formal and non-formal. And we can also look at it in the context of security and public order in the forthcoming RMK 12. This is something that I did review some of the chapters leading up to the RMK 12 document. So I did see that PCVE is a major thrust for security and public order for the forthcoming RMK 12. So why is it important? These are the two basically big questions that I'm asking that maybe we can discuss further. Why is it important for PCVE to be included as part of nation building? And how do we sustain nation building in the new normal? You know, with this thing called digital sovereignty, for example. It has, to a certain extent, changed the way that we view politics. And basically the battleground when we talk about terrorism as well as radicalization and recruitment. So this issue of digital sovereignty is something that states are trying to reclaim. I'll be giving some examples in the next few minutes or so with regards to this issue of digital sovereignty. And it does have, I think, implications with regard to trust on behalf of the population to the state, and also the tendency for the state to maybe overreach itself as well in terms of, I think, imposing or trying to impose too much control. I think we had this debacle, perhaps you can say, in Malaysia the past week or so with regards to the MCMC as well as the I think discussion, or it was brought up anyway, the possibility of requiring a FINAS license for social media content. So there are, it's not just Malaysia, but there are other countries as well. And there is a tendency to see that some states are overreaching their attempt to control the digital space. So for the remainder of this talk, I'll be looking at these four contexts: global, regional, national, and what I mentioned earlier, digital sovereignty. I'll be also looking at the pillars of Malaysian social contract and how those pillars like Rukun Negara and Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, how they support or they are able to support PCVE as a required content for our future nation building efforts. We'll also be looking a bit at the recommendations of the EPVE and my recommendations on the whole with regards to this talk. So let's look at the global and local context first. If we look at the new normal, if we look at COVID-19 and other trending issues, they are easily exploitable or appropriated for the purposes of hateful extremism as well as violent extremism objectives as well as narratives. If you just do a scan of the headlines over the past 3 or 4 months or so, you will find that there are materials with regards to this. So for example, if you talk about Black Lives Matter as a political movement in the US and also as a kind of post-colonial trend globally today, IS has or had also, I think, attempted to hijack the narrative for their own recruitment purposes and whatnot. So you can see this in the picture that we have here. Equality through Islamic State. Then we also have accusations or claims that COVID-19 is a divine retribution, and this is directed towards certain countries that are seen not to be friendly to Islam or to a certain image of Islam. So this is emphasized with regards, for example, to the casualties in a communist country like China or in Shia Iran, for example. And locally as well, we do see a certain spike perhaps in the sentiment of xenophobia as well. Gardenia, for example, inviting locals to apply because Malaysians were threatening, maybe certain groups were threatening to boycott the bread because of them finding out that they did hire Rohingya refugees in their manufacturing plants. So we do see these elements occurring from the global to the local context because of COVID-19, because of certain trending issues. So there will always be opportunities. And what I'm trying to say here is that when you talk about these issues, they are not crystallized or they are not present in the discourses in our educational system. We don't talk about these issues. To a certain extent, there is a kind of ignorance in the younger generation with regards to these issues. And I think there needs to be a kind of institutionalization of certain elements of critical thought as well as contemporary issues that we have to introduce in our schools, whether formally or non-formally, through debating clubs and so on, in order to get these issues into the public discussion space of our youth especially. And also when we talk about global and local context, we also do see some plans about weaponizing COVID-19. For example, in countries like Tunisia and Pakistan, getting infected by COVID-19, and then as a result of that, trying to, as a lone wolf operator, trying to spread the infection rate to as many people as possible. And because of lockdowns in most countries as well, it also makes it easier for those who are stuck at home to be exposed to, I think, radicalization as well as recruitment attempts by groups such as IS online. In terms of regional context, while we have seen that with the end of physical ISIS anyway, the number of attacks have declined, but there still is a concern about the lethality as well as wounded figures over the past 2 years. So in other words, it's become to a certain extent more efficient at killing and wounding people. I think on the whole, the concern is still about the significant number of failed and foiled attempts that are occurring in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, which is largely out of the, I think, public domain. So those who know, those who are doing field work, those who work together with the security agencies will know about these failed and foiled attempts, but they're not necessarily out there in the consciousness of the public as well. The other context that I wanted to focus on was on this thing called digital sovereignty. We do see that social media is weaponized by malicious actors, including, of course, terrorist organizations and their recruitment efforts and so on. But we do see this over-reliance on social media platforms for obtaining news. But there was a study, for example, done by Pew in 2016, and the findings found that about 88%, I think, of social media users are not, I think, trusting, or they're not confident about the level of facts that are presented on such platforms. So this concern about fake news or synthetic news is something that is, I think, very concerning. But because it is synthetic news, because it can easily be ideologically oriented towards a certain cause, this is what makes it, I think, such an effective entry point for malicious actors, recruitment organizations, or efforts by violent extremist groups and so on. That's what makes it successful, and so I think attractive to certain segments of participants or population who are at risk. And we also have this concern, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, of the state when it comes to digital sovereignty. The state tries to reimpose itself in claiming the space of digital sovereignty. Because if you understand the literature on digital sovereignty, when it first came out about 20 years ago, the understanding was that it is post-Westphalian. But now the understanding is that it is neo-Westphalian. So the state is trying to reclaim its sovereignty of digital space. And we see this from both democratic as well as authoritarian countries, in inverted commas. So I think everybody knows about the Great Firewall of China. But at the same time, there are such efforts such as Gaia X, this a blue picture that you see here with the digital tree, Ashajara in Arabic. So it's actually a state effort by Germany and France to look into data security, and mainly it's because of their concerns for their respective industries. Germany is worried about the over-reliance of their companies like Volkswagen and Audi on American platforms like Google and Amazon. So they are trying to steer their companies towards utilizing this new cloud system, this federated cloud system that they have, which is, of course, jointly organized by the governments of France and Germany. So this is something that we need to look at as well. This is the new frontier in a way, as well as the new battleground. There are also limitations in terms of moderating and regulating social media space. As we found out I think earlier this year and late last year with regards to Burma and Rohingya and the dissemination of hate speech, we can never really get the kind of moderation ratio that is probably required for developing countries, for example, when you compare to developed countries. If you look at a country like Germany, they have about 600 or 700 moderators. But during the whole episode with regards to Burma and hate speech with regards to the Rohingya situation, they only had about 60 moderators. So the ratio is not there as well. So there are limitations with regards to moderating and regulating. So to depend on companies to impose certain level of practices is also not something which is, I think, ideal as well. So it has to be, I think, a joint or collaborative efforts between the state, corporate organizations or social media companies, CSOs and others as well. And I did mention about Malaysia as well, and about our FINAS license, and it's been cleared up, of course, by the minister, but it does show the level of concern that society has about the efforts by governments to try and reclaim control over digital space. And some of the more seemingly innocent social media platforms as well are equally problematic. So if you look at TikTok, for example, they have been accused, because it's based in China, they've been accused of censorship when it comes to unfavorable items with regards to the Hong Kong civil movement, as well as anything on Xinjiang or the Uyghur population. So we do see that national security does make digital sovereignty, I think, a focal point. And it depends on the intersection between regime types, regardless of whether it's democratic or authoritarian. They will try to impose some sort of control. It also depends on the social media content, privacy laws, and international politics as well. So it's become very confusing with that regard. So if you just take, for example, the issue of the Uyghur situation in Xinjiang, the user is lost in a sea of synthetic content. You really don't have an idea of what is objectively true. So the sense of mistrust and injustice can be heightened as a result of that. And to a certain extent, you can't trust information coming from traditional as well as social media platforms. And this is a cause for concern. I think for idealists, this will definitely be, I think, an avenue for them to be radicalized and to perceive negatively of their own governments, yeah, with regards to the government's bilateral relations with China and so on. So this itself can be, I think, a factor that affects radicalization in the future as well. So that is with regards to digital sovereignty. Yeah. After looking at the context, I also see how Malaysia's pillars of social contract, for example, Rukun Negara and Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, I think can be used to make it an impetus for PCVE to be incorporated as part of the educational curriculum, formal and non-formal. As Daniel mentioned earlier, there's a great bunch of material available at global, regional, and national level with regards to modules and so on in relation to developing content. But at the same time, I think it's time for us to look into national as well as subnational content and for them to be institutionalized. I think we need to go to the next step now. So instead of, I think, having ad hoc programs and activities, which there have been a lot actually, but I think the next step after the NAP is to try to institutionalize this as much as possible into our education system. As far as universities is concerned, for example, IUM tries, my university tries to integrate its institutional as well as national and global frameworks for peace and for peace building, for example. So we have our Islamization philosophy, so we try to work it together with Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan at the national level, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. especially goal number 16 for building institutions of peace. So on our part, we are God willing developing, for example, an MA and certificate program in collaboration with Rotary Club. So here the idea is to incorporate PCVE as part of Peace Studies academic program. And we have other research as well along and efforts along these lines that we are currently developing. I'll skip the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan part. I'll just get to education for prevention and countering violent extremism. If you look at the recommendations, these are the 5 recommendations that are taken from the Hidayah Working Group with the Madrid Club, I believe, about 2 or 3 years ago. If you look at all of the 5 recommendations, they are essentially for PCVE to be incorporated as part of nation building. This is how I see it anyway. Because recommendation 1, for example, calls for EPVE to be implemented in national policy, in legislation, to obtain federal or state funding, as well as for it to be institutionalized. And secondly, to promote education that emphasizes on critical thinking and mutual respect. And thirdly, to look at youth issues, especially as non-security issues. Fourth, to look at students and educators building towards a resilient society through activism and advocacy, not rote learning. And number 5, to connect CSOs and communities. So if you look at all these 5 recommendations coming from education for prevention of violent extremism, we are looking at the realization of PCVE as being, I think, a permanent content of nation building efforts of nation states around the world. So this is something that we need to look at in Malaysia as well after the NAP. So by way of concluding, just 2 slides remaining. So these are the recommendations that I have from this talk anyway. It's time for us to curate content and institutionalize EPVE into the nation building syllabus. I think the political will is there. We need to incorporate, I think, contemporary issues such as the new normal, COVID-19 and whatnot, and other disruptive contexts as part of, I think, common discussion amongst the youth in this country. Secondly, the global framework, as we discussed, is sufficient. Locally or nationally and subnationally, we do have a whole bunch of programs and activities and engagement that we do, but I think we need it to be more stable and focused in the future. So we need to move to a more nation-building centric model in relation to PCVE with relevant curated national and subnational content and institutionalization. And we need to identify the implementers of this program and content as well. We also need for evidence-based approach for PCVE content creation, which to a certain extent we are already doing. So on our part, for example, my research team is working on effective narrative on youth, as well as social media usage of Malaysians. And there's another study that we're doing with regards to the border of Sabah and Mindanao. So the idea is, while researchers, for example, may be producing research findings, may be producing policy recommendations and so on, we hope that the National Action Plan will have a platform that will enable for these recommendations to find its way into the decision-making capacity of the state once we have it in order. Yeah. So this is something that we do. I think most of the time in Malaysia, the problem is that while we have our research findings and our recommendations, there usually isn't a platform or an avenue for us to present them and for them to be taken into consideration on board as part of policy improvement or policy performance improvements. We also do have a hypothesis for effective narrative for PCVE as well as youth. So I will not go into this, but we're testing the hypothesis. The research findings should be out in, I think, about 3 or 4 months or so. We'll be happy to share this with Siasat and the rest of the stakeholders in PCVE in Malaysia. So I think this can be, a way forward as to how we will organize as well as utilize certain programs and engagements in the future. Another thing that Malaysia needs to look into is the role of CSO. I think we lack this. We do not have a dedicated CSO, or we don't have dedicated CSO for PCVE efforts, focusing on certain groups or issues. So we need to rethink the role of CSO in our National Action Plan framework and how we attempt to use them for future PCVE activities as well. So maybe we need to identify a number of CSO groups and build capacity in them so that they can begin to tackle some of these issues and identify how to work with certain groups that are vulnerable. And lastly, the hope is that the NAP, which is still ongoing in terms of discussion, in terms of drawing up the plans. So as far as this is still the process, there's a lot that we can still contribute towards the content of the NAP itself. But I believe that how the NAP is formally structured and how it cascades down to the various implementing agencies, hopefully from different segments of society, from private organizations or corporate organizations, from CSOs, from educational institutions, as well as other government and from government, state and subnational level agencies as well. So I think this is the end of my presentation. So I look forward to having discussion on this with you in the next half an hour or so. Thank you very much.